I've always been a student of spiritual philosophy. That has always remained closest to my heart. So no matter what other profession that I wore the hat for, gardening or whatever, it's spiritual philosophy that has the closest place. I'm a life student of the Theosophical Society. I study Raja Yoga. I study esoteric Buddhism. I study mystic Christianity and many other pathways, any and all that lead to the divine. So that's just a little bit of who I am. The hat I'm wearing at the moment is bookstore. So thank you all for being part of my family. I'd like to read just a little bit. I have a very short introduction in the book. I'd like to read that to you and then maybe share a little out of the first chapter and a couple pages from the second chapter, and then back to the beautiful music and festivities of the evening. So I'll start off with sharing a little bit of the introduction. This is, by the way, my third book. Petals on the Path, Third Millennium World Teachings was my first book. That was released in 2006. My second book was World Peace Seeds, Planting and Growing Personal Destiny. That was released in 2007. And Journey of the White Robes, although the first edit was completed in 2008, then we got this idea of opening up a store, so it kind of slowed down the process, and it was just released a couple of months ago, 2010. So the book starts out with young Forrest Waters. He lives somewhere in southern Oregon, a town much like Grants Pass, amazingly. And he awakens, he has a crystal that was given to him by a medicine man, Blue Star, many years earlier. And he has this crystal sitting on a dresser by his bed in his little upstairs apartment. And the light from the crystal shines into his left eye, and it wakens him one morning. And he's excited. He wakes up. He's had a dream, and it's a fascinating dream. So he wakes up, and he's excited to meet his friend Aurora. They're going over to the community college to take a class that has to do with dreams. And it just so happens that he's had one that was very fascinating. So he gets up and gets dressed real quick and heads over to Aurora's house. Aurora Collins, by the way, her mother was Mabel Collins, but just for those that might be interested in that little sidebar. Forrest drives over to Aurora's and says, I need to tell you about a dream I had last night. Well, Aurora is just lovely. She is a flower. She's just a beautiful being. And she goes, well, Forrest, tell me about your dream. Well, let's get your things, let's get our things and be off to the workshop. So Aurora they gather up their belongings and they're heading out the door and heading over to the workshop that deals with dreams. And Forrest is so excited, he goes, I've got to tell you my dream. So he pulls the car over. He's piqued her curiosity because it's all about dreams. He said, it's so interesting. Last night I dreamed about my mother, who is deceased, coming out of a mystery school located inside of Mount Shasta. She had on a radiant robe that just was vibrating with golden white light. And as she came out of this school, she held out her palm. And in her palm there were 4 crystals. And that was all he remembered for the dream. But he felt that dream was an invitation to go to the mountain that day. Aurora immediately agreed, let's go to the mountain. So the two of them took off. They stopped by a store, picked up some snacks, put on their music in their car, and they were out for an experience. What was going to happen? They were being invited to the mountain. So they drove down to Mount Shasta, about 2 hours from where they lived in southern Oregon. They drove through the town, up to the upper parking lot on Mount Shasta, which many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with. And it was about a little over 2-hour trip. When they got there, it was real interesting. There was a small car that was parked at the upper parking lot. It was a tan car. And Forrest noticed it when he got there. He was just, they were preparing, getting their day pack and some snacks. They were going to take and go on this hike on the mountain and just kind of see what would reveal itself. But this car, he got out of the car and he reached in his pocket and he had pulled out a crystal. It was the one that woke him up that morning. Aurora said, well, I didn't know you brought your crystal. He said, well, yeah, I wanted to see if more would be revealed from the dream. So he had this crystal in his hand, and there was a woman getting out of the small tan car, and she was walking towards Forrest. She goes, hey, that's a beautiful crystal. I have one just like it. And he goes, oh, that's interesting. They just gravitated towards one another, and instinctively he just held out his hand to offer her his crystal to look at. And indeed it did. She invited Forrest to come to her car to see her crystal that looked like the one that he had brought. So they walked over to her car, and the trunk was open. And the trunk was like a traveling altar. There were beautiful paintings of angels in it and books. It was like a spiritual altar right there in the trunk, right on top of Mount Shasta. She pulled out her crystal, and indeed it looked very much like the one that Forrest had brought that morning. She said, "Would you like to meet my traveling companions?" And Forrest said, "Well, sure, I'd like to meet your traveling companions." So she reached into a hidden pocket and pulled out 2 more crystals. So there it was. The 4 crystals for the dream were right there on Mount Shasta. Well, Aurora kind of felt the excitement and came over to meet this wonderful woman. And they talked for a few moments. And Aurora told this lovely woman that they had come because of a dream that Forrest had. Well, the woman thought that was interesting too. And her name was Sharon. She said, "Well, that's interesting because I've been invited to the mountain today to meet someone. And that someone is the 2 of you." She says, "You may have noticed in my trunk the paintings of angels. I paint the angels. And they communicate with me. And they told me to come to the mountain to this precise place at this precise time to meet someone. And that someone is the 2 of you." So that was exciting. They visited for about an hour. They were just laughing and just having the best time, like they were reconnecting with old family. You know, when you meet someone, it's like you can't stop, and there's so much to talk about. But okay, so they had their wonderful time together. This beautiful woman then drove away down to the Bay Area where she had come from earlier that morning. Forrest and Aurora had decided, well, let's climb the mountain. Let's see what's going on. So they gathered their goodies and their packs, and they started climbing the switchbacks. They went up a few hundred yards and started having some incredible experiences with particles of light. There was just light everywhere. It was blinding. It was so intense. They thought, well, is it the change in atmosphere? Are we, is it hiking? What's going on? They didn't really know what it was, but it was somehow as though time had shifted. The particles came, were there what seemed like for hours, and then vanished. They said, okay, well, let's just continue our journey. As they continued their journey, they started having thoughts, and they started exchanging thoughts with one another. They began to be in telepathic rapport. It was kind of different because neither of them had experienced telepathy before on that level, but they were seeing pictures from each other's minds, so they thought it was very interesting. They hiked up to what many call St. Germain's living room. I don't know what it's called. I mean, it was a beautiful place on top of the mountain. They were there and they spent time, and of course all this is just very paraphrased, and they spent some wonderful time having their snacks and meditating. And then they thought, well, maybe this was the reason for the journey today, to meet Sharon, to come up here, to be in rapport with one another, and to have this visit with these particles of light. So they gathered their things and said, well, let's head back home. So they started going down the mountain, down the switchbacks. Well, they went down the first switchback or so, and all of a sudden the particles of light were there again. Well, there was some information that happened up on the ledge that you can find out what was going on with that. But they found 2 natural stone seats side by side on the switchback, and they just looked down the switchback. As they were looking down, the light just got brighter and brighter and brighter. And when the light faded a bit, there was a golden portal right there in the pathway. It was a tunnel that was leading inside the mountain. They thought, oh, this is the entrance to the mystery school. Is that what's going on? They were just very excited. So slowly, they no fear, they just worked their way over to the portal, and then that was the beginning of the first journey much for and the love of me greets each and every one of you. Bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
A lot of work.